it was for me, going to that space, going out to that club, other clubs, was always sort of like a search that never produced results.
Okay, so I recognize that what I'm about to say is probably just the contrarian in me popping out. Well, actually, that's probably not that fair because the contrarian in me is about 97% of me. But let's not focus on that particular character flaw right now because maybe it's not great for me to draw attention to that. But anyway, I recognize that it's the contrarian in me that is about to say this, but I kind of do love when people come on this show and are like, yeah, I went to queer spaces, I've been there, I've done that, I've got the t-shirt, and actually I'm good. Like, it wasn't a good time in my life. Because I think that, well, I mean, yeah, the whole conceit of this show is at risk of glamorizing or over-romanticizing queer spaces. Oh, actually, I should stop and say hello. My name's Kay Anderson. This is Lost Spaces, the show that is all about lost queer spaces and the memories that they left behind. What was I saying? Oh, yeah. So sometimes there's a risk for us to over-romanticize lost queer spaces, and then in doing so, we can totally overlook all of the really kind of not so great elements of queer nightlife and queer community and those spaces. And actually, there is a big, wide world outside of the scene, and there are many, many ways to figure out who you are, not just on a dance floor surrounded by sweaty bodies and covered in glitter. And that's exactly the reminder that I got this week when I sat down with the author Troy Ford. Now, Troy is just about to release his new book, Lamb, which is a novel about two friends navigating their complicated relationship over a number of years. And to stick with the theme, we thought we would talk about complicated relationships, and in particular, Troy's complicated relationship with San Francisco in the 90s, where he tried to connect and tried to feel at home and went out and had many wonderful evenings out, but never quite stuck the landing, never felt part of the community, never felt part of something bigger than himself in that space. And I think, yeah, that's something that a lot of people resonate with, thinking that the queer scene is going to suddenly solve all their problems and then coming crashing down to earth when they realize that is not the case. We're kind of awful people, aren't we? Anyway, let's get into the episode and find out a little bit more from Troy. Actually, I want to just go right into a really deep question with you, if that's okay.
Okay.
Do you think that you would be a writer if you weren't gay?
Wow. I can't imagine not being gay. I don't think I would, if I'm being honest. I think that if I had been straight, that I would have been completely a chip off the old block from my father, and I would have gotten into sports the way he was, and I would have played golf the way he was, and I would have been a Republican the way he was. I would have just molded myself, into that, and I would have, I would be, I think, a completely different person. So no, I don't think I would have been, I don't know what, an accountant probably, or
You paint a very grim story there.
yeah, it was a bit grim in my childhood home at times. Yeah.
But interesting, though, that when I asked that question, for a lot of people who are writers or artists or whatever, they'll be like, I just can't imagine not creating my art, not doing my thing, not expressing myself. And you didn't say, I can't imagine not being a writer. You said, I can't imagine not being gay.
Yes. I can imagine not being a writer because I spent, 50 years not being a writer. I wanted to be a writer.
Oh, well, yeah, I was going to say, because you were a frustrated writer, that's still a writer, right?
Well, I wrote in a journal. I've kept journals all my life, but I had a very bad experience when I was 17. I went to summer school and I took a creative writing class, and another situation where a teacher, gave me a really hard time. Actually shamed me over a story that I wrote, and it drove me so deep into self-consciousness.
And they shamed you because of the content of the story or because of the quality of the story?
It was a combination of things. So it was a science fiction fantasy course, and they made it clear from pretty much the very first day that they were more interested in science fiction, that they weren't really into fantasy, and yet that was what I absolutely wanted to write, was fantasy. And so I wrote a fantasy story, and it ran too long for the brief. I made mistakes in it, but when I look back, actually, it was quite inventive, and it was very, I think, very creative. But for whatever reason, they just tore it up one side and down the other in a classroom full of my peers. And I went to them afterwards, and I said to them, that I think I got a D on that particular assignment. And I went to them afterwards, and there was only 2 stories that we were going to be turning in for our full grade. And I said, this can't happen again, or I'm going to end up with, basically a failing grade. So what, do I need to do? I went to them before class at their office hours, which happened to be at the faculty club, and they were already 3 gin and tonics in. Oh. And this was what they did before every class. So they were basically coming to class drunk. And they actually apologized to me in private when I met with them after that terrible grade. And they said, oh, yeah, we were pretty hard on you. Ha, ha, ha. And so, so it was tough. It was weird.
Okay, so first of all, if you are listening to this and you are a teacher, just take your job a bit more seriously, please. And second of all, so that experience changed the trajectory of your career.
Completely. Yeah. I mean, instead of giving me constructive criticism and saying, okay, you've made some mistakes, but these are what they are. And this is how you could change it, or these are the rules that you need to, sort of follow, or whatever,
Yeah.
But no, instead, I remember distinctly in big red letters across one of the pages, "What a joke." And I was absolutely humiliated. And I couldn't get over it, for 34 years, actually.
Shit.
I couldn't finish anything. I would get 20, 30, 40 pages in, and then I would just become so self-conscious, and I would just doubt myself, and I couldn't get past it. So.
Okay. So we've learned about your journey. I hate that word, sorry. I always use it though. I always use that word.
Use it too.
So we've learned about your journey with writing, but what we haven't learned about is your journey with homosexuality. The thing that you couldn't imagine not being. So
right.
Why don't we start? And if you can remember, the first inkling, when did that come to you?
I think probably age 9, 10 years old or so. I remember being maybe not, at that point sexually attracted, but definitely like attracted
Intrigued.
to some of my teachers, some of the fathers of my friends, type of thing. I remember I asked my friend around this time, 10 years old probably. I remember asking him, do you ever, think about, look at men,
Oh, wow.
and he was like, no. And I was like,
Emphatically, no.
yeah, it was an emphatic no, and I took that as my cue, and I never spoke of it again.
But so when you asked this question, is it because you didn't have a concept of homosexuality? Like you didn't know that it was shameful to be bringing this up?
I knew it was shameful. Yeah, I know. I mean, it shouldn't be, but it
Yeah, of
was
course,
for
yeah.
me. I'm pretty sure that I had maybe at this point already been to the library and checked out, not actually, I probably just snuck peeks at it at the library. Everything you always wanted to know about sex, but we're afraid to ask, for example.
And you saw the half a page about gay people.
I don't remember it at all, but probably, yeah. I don't even remember what it said, but I remember there were jokes, kids tell jokes about all sorts of crazy things, and you get a pretty clear picture at a very young age.
Of course,
that, being gay is not okay.
Yeah. But then, so then what gave you the confidence to ask your friend that?
I guess I don't know. I don't know if maybe there was something about him. I wasn't attracted to him. You know what I mean? Like it wasn't about that. I think maybe I just felt comfortable enough with him. We were good friends. He was my best friend for a while, but this was when we lived in Saudi Arabia as a child. From the age of 7 to the age of 13, my family, we moved from Southern California, where I grew up, and we moved to Saudi Arabia.
Okay.
And so we were surrounded by military families who would kind of like do 2-year stints.
Yeah.
And so, every 2 years I had a new best friend, basically.
Oh, it's quite nice.
Yeah, kind of. And so this particular friend, we were close, and to his credit, even though his answer was no, and I'm fairly sure, I think we got in touch briefly years and years later, and he was married and had kids, so he was straight, obviously. But to his credit, I think, even though it was a no to my question, he didn't make me feel bad about it. He actually never mentioned it again, you know what I mean? But his behavior didn't change at all, as I recall. And so we remained friends until his family moved away. We were one of the longer staying families. It's like 7 years. A lot of them came for 2 years, and then they couldn't stand it, and they bugged back out to the States.
Okay. And I do recall at the beginning of our conversation, you talked about your father being Republican, sports loving, a particular brand of male. So when you had this realization, when you were like, oh yes, the teacher gave me the tingle, what did that mean? Like, how did you navigate that? Was it just, I am going to sit on this secret and not tell anyone about it? I'm going to just run away as soon as I can? Or did something else go on for you?
It was deep denial. It was almost like sort of a dissociative experience, where there was kind of two parallel lives. One was entirely a life of the mind, which might actually be part of, the explanation in part for why, I wanted to be a writer, and why I have such a deep sort of connection to imagination or whatever. But on the surface, the thing is, I didn't try to kind of perform the masculine things, the sports and I didn't go along with my father, in his love of sports and all of that. I didn't try because I think I was just very locked down. I didn't know what was going on, and so I just shut down. Actually, I think pretty much from I'd say the time that we moved from Saudi Arabia when I was 13, and we moved to a small town just north of Seattle. And because my dad was he was in the aeronautics industry, and so he was going to get a job at a Boeing plant up there, and that didn't materialize. But that year that we spent north of Seattle, and this was in 1983, 1984. I was taken from, overseas, this very small school of no more than 100 students. And I was thrown into a junior high school, with, I think there was just the 3 grades, 7th, 8th, and 9th in the U.S., with, 800 students. And I was strange, obviously. I was, I was coming from a foreign country, not even from Washington State to begin with. I was not into sports. I was, whatever. And so I was bullied and harassed mercilessly, even though I wasn't doing anything. I wasn't saying anything. It was just like, faggot. That was, that was it.
But so at this point then, when you were being bullied for being gay, had you accepted that you were gay? Or
no?
Okay.
No. I think in the absence of knowing and speaking and having support for that sort of thing, there was a part of me that knew, but that part of me that knew was also taking in all of this horrible harassment and name calling and bullying or whatever, and just eating it, just eating this poison and feeling worse and worse and worse and worse about myself for, that year and for years afterwards.
So, okay, I'm going to posit a question, if you will, but I don't necessarily expect you to have a response or anything. I'm just going to say it because it's been this thing that's coming up in conversations recently for me and that I've been ruminating on. And that is, from the outside, like if you have no idea about school politics, gender identity, sexual orientation, yada, 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 and you hear the story of one child that is being ostracized by the other children because they aren't alike and they have noticed something different in them. And that child desperately wants to fit in and desperately wants to be a part of the in crowd, then from this like outsider perspective, again, someone who like doesn't understand the intricacies of schools and people and all that gross stuff, why would you not just learn to like the things that they like? Why would you not just conform in order to fit in? And why are we unable to do that? What is it that stops us?
I don't know that I have an answer to that. I'm not sure what the word is exactly, except that I know that very often I would have sort of these dissociative sort of experiences where, and I would be observing myself, my body, and other people or whatever, like as if I kind of sometimes liken it to being invisible, like I would turn myself invisible. I would turn my true self invisible. And then there would be just an empty shell, So I don't think it was even possible for me to try to conform. I was frozen. I was in a perpetual state of fight, flight, or freeze. I was in a perpetual state of freeze. Don't move and they can't see you type of thing.
Yeah. So if you make yourself as small as possible, that's going to minimize the disruption.
Yeah. Just say nothing. Don't react. I one time I didn't actually tell my father, that they were calling me faggot, but I did tell my father that I had been called every name in the book, which, that's one of the every names. And he said, well, just ignore them and they'll stop. Which, we've heard this 1,000 times, and of course it never happens. But also I realized too, I'm a furious blusher. And so every time anything like that happened, I would turn bright red. And so they knew that they were getting to me. It wasn't as if I couldn't hear them or whatever. So they knew that they had gotten into my head. And so yeah, and that really kind of went on. There was some of that as well in the high school and into like my first year. I was still very locked down, still very shut down and frozen, kind of all the way through my first year of college, and then I started seeing other gay people. I started seeing, this was Berkeley too. I mean, you cannot get any more liberal than that. And so I finally came out to my best friend as a bisexual because I couldn't bring myself to actually say gay, but that didn't last very long.
Yes, it's a well-known gateway to gayness, bisexuality.
Yes. Indeed.
So what did it mean to see those people out in the wild?
Strangely enough, the first two gay people that I met were freshman year in high school, and it was a couple, and it was a gay couple, and they became friendly with a friend of mine, who I still kind of wonder, maybe he was also in the closet at the time. But in any event, we hung out a few times, and one time I went with one of them to go to, I don't know, the store for beer, or I don't remember what. And he asked me point blank, and I knew he was gay, and his partner was at the party waiting for us to bring back whatever, and he asked me point blank if I was gay, and I said no. It just wasn't there for me. I couldn't do it yet.
But he didn't like lead up to it in a gentle way. He just was like, by the way, are you gay?
Yeah, it was kind of like that, actually. And I kind of think, I don't know, maybe people had probably discussed it, my friend that he was friends with or whatever. Probably they were like, well, what's up with Troy? And so who knows, maybe he was tasked with finding out. But yeah, he did not find out the truth. So,
well, if you're going to use a sledgehammer.
Exactly.
But knowing them gave you a bit more confidence, or?
I would say yes. It was the first time I had seen gay people interacting openly with straight people and not being bullied for it and not being, sort of made to feel bad about it. In that group, it was perfectly acceptable, and so, and I was fine with it, with them being who they were. I just didn't know who I was at that point. And I think I want to say, so at that same summer school where I had that horrible experience with the writing class and those teachers, I had a girlfriend.
Oh,
the one and only girlfriend.
Plot twist.
Yeah, and so we remained. Theoretically, we remained boyfriend and girlfriend through our senior years in high school, long distance, very convenient.
Aww.
So even after that experience, freshman year in college, and saying to this guy, no, I'm not gay, I then had my one and only sexual experience with a woman, with that girlfriend, that summer after freshman year. So as late as 19 years old, I lost my virginity with a woman, and that was, I think that was, I hate to say that this is, and I hope it's not the same anymore. That people don't have to go through that. Just to know, what I mean? Because, really we all know there's no question.
Oh, I don't know if that's true.
Well, maybe, I don't know. But for me, it was a function of
Yeah.
continuing down this, this supposedly straight, heterosexual life. And then after that, it was just like, okay. I mean, it was a successful event. Let's just say that. However, I felt pretty sure that I didn't want to repeat it.
Oh no. So did you like let her down gently, or were you just so terrible that she was like, please lose my phone number?
I don't know. I really don't know. But no, we stayed in touch. Actually, in fact, I was her, I'm not sure what the term is. Her husband had a best woman
Okay.
as a best man. And so I was
The best
best
man, woman.
I was
best.
the maid of honor, basically, for her at her wedding years later. So we stayed friends, but
Oh,
yeah,
so you
when
can't
I
have
was,
been that bad.
I guess not. I hope not. I was both our first times. I hope it, I mean, how good can it be your first time out? But, but yeah, no, we stayed friends.
Okay. So we've done the little exploration of your gayness, queerness. Where does San Francisco come into this? How did you end up there?
I went to Berkeley after high
okay.
school. I went to UC Berkeley, and I took some time off after my sophomore year. It was at that point, my sophomore year is when I came out to a few people. But even then, actually, the bullying kind of continued on through my sophomore year in college. And yeah, it was a very strange, still 1989, let's say. Okay. Not even 20 years after Stonewall, basically. So I had a hard time as I was coming out, as I was, feeling myself really for the first time, as my identity was sort of starting to finally integrate. I ended up taking about 3 semesters off in the middle of my college career. And then I went back and I finished my last 2 years. And it was just at the end of that I finally came out to my parents. And that didn't really go well.
Ooh, okay, I want to find out about that, but let me just position myself better in this story.
Yes.
So you took the time off from university. Were you out in other areas of your life at that time, or were you still kind of bumbling and finding your way?
Bumbling, totally bumbling. Yeah. Didn't have a boyfriend. Wasn't even really, not going out to clubs or anything like that. I mean, I was still only about 19, 20 years old at that point. It was only when I re-enrolled for my junior year and then continued on straight through. So this is 1990. And then I started meeting more gay people, on purpose, trying to, get into the fray. Yeah.
So I think I've asked this question about something else already today, but what changed?
I guess it was just time, I mean, I guess it was just like baby steps, each one leading to the next, the next.
So it was less of an epiphany and more of a fuck's sake, Troy, like pull yourself together. We've got to do something.
Yeah.
Okay.
The first gay club I went to, so I'll say this, the first time I ever set foot in a gay bar, it was the White Horse, which at this point I think is the oldest gay bar in America. I knew it was a gay bar. I was driving past. I thought, I've just got to do it. I've just got to walk into that place. And so I parked the car. I walked across the street. I walked in the front door. I turned around and I walked straight back out again.
Well, you did say baby steps. So, I mean.
That was a baby step. It was a baby step. So that was actually the first time I ever set foot in a gay bar. And it was literally 1 foot. It wasn't even both feet.
But was it an exhilarating foot?
No, it was terrifying.
Oh, okay.
It was absolutely terrifying.
That can be exhilarating, though. No. You just shat yourself and went home. Okay.
Okay. Yeah. So then, I was at that point, I was out to all my friends. And so a friend of mine actually had befriended a woman, a lesbian woman, in classes or whatever. And so it was my straight friend who actually said to me, oh, there's this gay club on Shattuck Avenue in Berkeley. It's called The Mix. That's another lost space, actually. The Mix. It was an 18-plus club, actually, and it was almost all Berkeley queens. And so my straight friend actually dragged me to my first gay club.
Aww.
And from that point, then I began dating and I began seeing people, even though I never actually had a boyfriend while I was in college.
But out of choice or because you didn't connect with anyone?
Well, I had crushes. God, I had a number of crushes, actually, and where I would just, fixate on somebody that I thought was cute, and, we would become friends, but I would never make a move. And so nothing ever really happened. I mean, I did make noises. I did, make,
Can you demonstrate the noises you made to me right now?
Would you? No, never mind. So that's how that went. And that kind of lasted, through college, basically. Slowly, more out, more integrated, more myself, I think.
Culminating in you coming out to your parents.
Culminating in my coming out to my parents. I had sent them a audio cassette, if you remember those.
Oh. Did you make them a mixtape?
No, I didn't make them a mixtape. It was from PFLAG, Parents and Friends of Lesbians and Gay.
I thought it was an audio tape of you confessing to them.
No, I'm sorry. No, so this is how it went. I called my mother one day. And this was, I take it back, this was a little bit earlier when I was taking that time off in the middle of university. Mm-hmm. And trying to explain to my mother why I was having such a difficult time. And so I finally kind of just came out with it and said, I'm gay. And she said, so what?
Oh, but so what in a that's great. Live your life, be free.
No.
Okay.
It was so what, as in, you will never speak of this again. I'm not going to make an issue. I'm just going to shut this down by not saying anything. She said, so what? And that was the end of it. Yeah. And then about 2 weeks later, I had actually, during the conversation, it was a very short conversation, but during the conversation, I had asked her if she would maybe tell my father for me. Broach the subject, let him know.
Well, even after her response, though, you were like, well, you're a good advocate for me. Why don't you go and tell her?
Well, that's where I was. So she said she would. But then 2-3 weeks later, I hadn't heard anything. Oh. And so I called her and I said, did you tell him? And she's like, no, I just couldn't bring myself to do it. And so I was like, okay, all right, well then, fine, put him on. And so I told my dad, and guess what he said?
Was it, so what?
So what? Exactly the same thing. And that was it. I mean, that was literally, as far as they were concerned, they had been informed. It had absolutely no effect on them or their life. I said once to my mother later, I said, what you're really saying to me about all this is that it's just not part of your world. And she said, yes, that's exactly right. And I thought, oh, okay, well, then your son is obviously not part of your world either, But in trying to tell them and trying to, sort of create some sort of space where I could talk to them, because at this point, I was still terrified of my own shadow. I'd been out for about 2 years at this point, and I didn't have a boyfriend, never had dated anyone more than, 1 or 2 times or whatever. And so I don't know that I could really talk to people about it either. I was still very deeply kind of like lost. But I knew that I wanted my parents to at least, sort of support me somehow. And so I sent them this tape. It was from P-Flag, and it was basically, a bunch of P-Flag parents talking about their own journey of, discovering that their kid was gay and how they dealt with it, And I sent the tape to them, and I didn't hear anything. And I finally said to them, have you listened to it? And they were just like, no. And I said, will you please listen to it? Please, I'm begging you, please just listen to this tape, because I really wanted to open this dialogue with them and just let them know, I'm scared. I don't know what to do. You know what I mean? Like, the gay community is there and I'm in it, but I don't necessarily feel like I really belong. And I'm still very, very lost. And so that after I graduated, it was in December 1992. I graduated like in the middle of the year because of the time I had taken off. And I went home, and on the drive home, I already knew that, I wasn't sure what exactly, but I just knew that it had not gone well, that either they hadn't listened to the tape or that they had listened to the tape and they didn't like it. And so I asked my father point blank, did you listen to the tape? And he just launched into this diatribe about how horrible it was and all these people and how pathetic they were and blah, 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 all these parents that had accepted their gay kids, blah, 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 blah. And I was livid. Not just livid, but I was crushed too. And I was just like, okay, well, this is it.
Yeah. By
the time we got home, my father and I weren't even speaking. My mother just tried to brush the whole thing under the carpet and pretend like, that I should just put a smiley face on it. So the next day was Christmas Day, as a matter of fact. And my mother left to go pick up my grandmother, I believe. And I raided their liquor cabinet and I got wasted. And when my mother got home, I'm sure to her, was in a terrifying state. I was kind of like screaming and yelling and da-da-da-da. And she kicked me out of the house on Christmas Day. Oof. Justifiably, I think, And so I flew back up to Berkeley, and I didn't speak to them for a year. And we had been in weekly communication all through, all through boarding school and college. And, so I didn't speak to them for a year, and I didn't see them for 5 years after that. And in that time, of course, my life sort of just went on. I got a job, I worked, I did have, boyfriends for periods of time and so forth. So my life went on, and they were just kind of less and less part of it, to the point where I think at some point my feelings for them sort of switched. And I started to kind of think of them not so much as like my parents, but as my grandparents. How you can kind of, I don't know how some people's, grandparents are, but you have somewhat of a more distance. Yeah, okay. It's a generational thing. It's also, very few people have actually lived with their grandparents all their lives, type of thing. And so I just kind of started feeling of them like, okay, these are like much older people, in my family who don't share my values. They don't really, they're not really okay with the gay thing. And so I'll just treat them like, distant relatives in a way. And that worked, actually. I mean, we were able to be sort of, close again in a way that makes holidays okay to be
but together. like close on a surface level where everything is okay. But go back then, so to before you came out. Well, maybe actually not before you came out, after you came out, but before the tape was sent to them. It seems as though they were trying to maintain a relationship with you. Like, they weren't outright rejecting you. They were just like, by the way, Correct. Don't talk about who you actually are. Just be this thing that we want you to be.
Yeah, I mean, from that perspective, it was not as bad as it could have been, certainly. But when you were just basically, expected to continue performing,
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah, no. Yeah, sorry, I'm not trying to say
as you
like,
always had. No, I know.
So then before you came out, would you have considered your relationship a close one?
I think to the extent that I was emotionally capable of that, I would have said yes. But once I came out and once things started breaking down, I realized to what extent I'd been a cardboard cutout, basically, of like, this is our son, and prop me up. And, there's no surface to it. There's no depth to it. But, this is our son. And so I just performed that function. And they expected me to continue performing that role, afterwards, and not becoming the person that had depth, not becoming the person that, that I needed to be.
Or that might deviate from their very narrow understanding of who you should be.
Right, exactly.
And so I'm jumping across the timeline here, so sorry. But so in this year after the cassette tape, when you didn't talk to them at all, what were you thinking? Were you anxiously waiting for them to get in touch, or were you just like, that's it, I'm done?
I don't think I knew. I don't think I knew.
Uh-huh.
They very generously, they supported me all through college. Thank goodness I did not have, crushing school debt after I graduated or whatever. However, after the argument where I was, I got roaring drunk, I got thrown out of the house on Christmas, and I came back to, I went back to the Bay Area on my own. I was on my own. 100%. There was no me going to them saying, oh, I don't, I need money or whatever like that. It was just like, okay, I this is it. I'm on my own, So I was basically, starting from, okay, I've got a degree and now I'm getting on with it. And so it was, from that perspective, it was a difficult time only in that, I didn't have a steady job at that point. I had part-time jobs all through school, but I couldn't. The last job I had, I was not able to continue after I graduated because it was contingent on my being a student. So I had to find a job. And at that point, I was still living in Berkeley, but I knew that if I wanted to, participate in a larger gay community, that I would need to move to San Francisco. So within that first 6 months, and this would have been 1993, I moved to San Francisco. I was temping, actually. I was temping at a financial services firm downtown. And like I said, I was just getting on with living my life, being an adulting.
Oh, boring. So I want to get to San Francisco because we're like, how long? We're quite far into this conversation. We really need to start talking about the lost space. But just quickly, or maybe not quickly, but my last question, did your relationship recover?
I mean, yes, by the end, I think mainly because I just didn't care about what they thought, My partner and I, like I said, we've been together 25 years now. And I introduced him to my parents. We went down one time and we stayed in the spare bedroom together once. The next time we went, my father made it clear that he wasn't comfortable with us staying. And it's not like we had sex or anything in my parents' house.
So bizarre.
But once was enough. My father let us know. And he paid for the hotel room that we stayed in when we went there to visit them. Yeah, it was just nice, But, I mean, when you're dealing with that, at some point you're just like, okay, whatever. You know what I mean? Whatever you want.
Yeah.
I'm just here for the pumpkin pie, whatever.
It's such a difficult balance to strike, right? Like, part of me is very like strident and stubborn, and a very big part of me is that. And I'd just be like, no, that's it. Like, you're accepting me or you're not accepting me. It's like yes or no. It's like on or off, and off I go. But I understand that, like, you do need to make these compromises.
in the end, it didn't really feel like a compromise because it was just kind of, I just didn't give a fuck, you know?
Well, I mean, you gave a fuck enough to stay in a hotel and not be like, fuck you, I'm staying in your spare bedroom.
I suppose. To be honest, I was more comfortable, you know what I mean?
Oh, no,
the
yeah,
spare
of course.
bedroom wasn't that comfortable,
No, yeah.
so, you know.
And you got a mint on your pillow. Like, you don't get that at home, do you?
Sure, no. To this day, I'm still waiting for my mint.
Yeah, I don't know. Parents, family, relationship, human beings. They're all just really weird. They're so strange.
Aren't we? Aren't we?
Okay. So let's head to San Francisco and let's head to the Townsend. Is it the Townsend or Townsend?
Townsend was an address, strangely enough. It was the Townsend was the street, and the address was 177 Townsend. But you never said, I'm going to Townsend. You said, I'm going to Pleasure Dome. I'm going to Pleasure Dome.
Ah, okay.
You see, because it was one of these spaces where Universe, that's what I was trying to think of, Universe was, for a time anyway, was the Saturday night club. And Pleasure Dome was the Sunday night club. Mm-hmm. And this was kind of like, I would say this was maybe the only sort of mega club in San Francisco at that time. And I don't know that they have any clubs still that are as large as it was. You know, I don't know what its capacity was, but it was kind of the mainstay during that time. And like on a Sunday night, Pleasure Dome was for example, was pretty much the only place to be if you wanted to go to a gay club and dance to house music and take ecstasy and
take your clothes off.
Acid and no, there was it was not clothing optional. I tested that more than once in a drunken stupor and it was not.
Well, it didn't fly. Like they made you put your clothes back on.
Well, friends would.
Oh, okay. I was imagining a security guard coming up and being like, right, put your shirt back on.
Oh, well, you mean, sure, take your shirt off, you know. Everybody took their shirts off.
Oh, wait, okay, hang on. I'm learning something new here. What, you tried to get naked?
No, not entirely naked, but just, yeah. but not decently clothed, let's say. This was, I mean,
okay, best if I don't ask follow-up questions, I think.
Well, we could, you know, but that's another long whole story.
Okay, so the space is Townsend, but the clubs were different. Like, so it was Universe some nights and was like this mega club. Do you remember the first time you ever went?
So the first time I ever went, I believe I had been out the night before as well. And so I had gone out the night before, and I'm pretty sure that I had done crystal meth. And so I was still high the next day. And then I took acid with a friend. And so I had not slept in, 2 days, and arrived at Townsend for Pleasure Dome on a Sunday night. And I met my first boyfriend there that night. I think the first time I went.
Okay, so I have follow-up questions. I want to ask this without sounding really judgmental, but I think
Please,
I will sound really judgmental.
That's okay.
So you'd really embraced gay life by this time.
I would say no. I would say I had not. I mean, I think that the drugs and the drinking were a way to tolerate it, to engage with it. Mm-hmm. But I think that I was still having a really, really hard time. I mean, I was, by this time, let's see, that would have been my last year in college, actually.
Oh, okay.
No, I take it back. It was that first year after. It was after the blowout with my parents. It was 1993. That's right, because I dated that boyfriend, and it was my first boyfriend. So I was 22 going on. No, I was 24 years old. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So no, I wouldn't say that I was embracing. I was definitely in it. I wanted to be, mm-hmm. embracing it, but I wouldn't say that I didn't feel a part of it. I just felt it like a pretender, let's just say.
So do you feel a part of it now?
I wouldn't say I still don't necessarily feel like I'm really part of it, if I'm being honest.
I don't think I've ever met anyone who does feel part of it.
Really? Really?
Yeah, I think we're all kind of like bumbling around like, I'm going to find this queer community somewhere. I'm going to belong to something at some point. And I don't think any of us have like quite got there. But maybe that's just me being glass half empty. That's kind of my thing. But anyway, so sorry. So you were saying, so you embraced drug taking as a way of trying to get over that chasm. And
I would say so.
Okay.
I mean, I would say that, it just so happened, I think, that I was on acid when I met that boyfriend. And, I mean, I wasn't like a total acid head, doing it every weekend type of thing.
Just every second weekend, right?
Well, yeah. No, I was drinking. I was drinking a lot. And the problem with drinking for me, at any rate, was, like you get drunk and you get messy. You might black out, you get messy, and someone helps you put your clothes back on and put you in a cab and sends you home.
So you're that kind of drunk.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, so that kind of went on. And I think that it definitely, it affected my, it affected everything, of course. But yeah, so.
So what were you going to say? It affected what?
I mean, I think it affected my prospects, with meeting people, okay. I suppose. I mean, unless I'm trying to think if. I do remember, like one guy, sort of kind of being like, oh, you have a problem and, and I can't see you or whatever.
It's kind of hard, isn't it? It's like this thing that helps you, but then it also hinders you.
Yeah, no, definitely. Absolutely.
So this first night, you're in the space for the very first time. It's when you meet that boyfriend. What do you remember of that space?
I remember nothing about that space.
Okay, all right. Well, then let me ask a follow-up question. Why was this the space that you wanted to talk about?
Because I went back many times. I mean, I can tell you about it. I can certainly describe it to you. It was basically a warehouse.
But I'm less interested in like the physical space, and I'm more interested in like what that felt like to be in there.
What it felt like. As I recall, it was a place to go and do drugs and to dance. The music was always fabulous. You would arrive and you would dance and drink and try to meet people, I suppose. I did meet I met another boyfriend there as well, actually.
Okay, so tell me, in the way that you're telling your story, you come across as the outsider, as the person that is not able to connect with people. Yes. But you've now told me about 2 boyfriends that you've met.
Yes. Well, yes. Yes. The second one lasted for about a year.
But so let's dig into it a bit more then. So like obviously the 2 things can be true. Like you can be an outsider and can still connect with people.
But to the extent that I connected with them, I mean, I don't know that I necessarily really connected with them ultimately, those 2.
Okay, that's what I'm getting at. So was it more of a, for want of a better term, like a you'll do type situation, or like you've shown interest in me, so I'm going to grab hold tightly?
I think, at least with the first one, that was true. The second one, I really did fall for. And he fell for me too. But again, I don't think that we were really especially suited to each other. And he was sober, actually. He, I don't know how long he had already been sober when we met. But when I met him, I was 3 sheets to the wind. And we went home.
What does that phrase mean?
Like really drunk.
No, but like, what are the 3 sheets?
I don't know. Three sheets to the wind. I think it has something to do with sailing.
Oh, okay.
Like if you're on one of those, schooners, sailing ships or whatever, and you've got all three sails going, you're like full.
Okay. I was thinking it was like a
full
washing
speed
line
ahead.
story. Anyway, so
No, I don't think so.
It's not, no. I'm like, because that would, it would make no sense. Why would anyone? Anyway, sorry. So you met him, you were drunk. Carry on the story.
Drunk. Went home. Next morning, I didn't remember his name. And
that was the beginning of a year-long relationship.
It was, yeah. And I got sober the first time while I was dating him, and so I would say I didn't really, I don't know, didn't really connect with someone until I met my husband, basically.
Ah, interesting. Okay, let's go back then. So this space, how did it feed Troy's soul?
Did it feed my soul? I don't know.
Ooh.
I don't know. I have to be completely honest that I got sober in 1998, and then I fell off the wagon. And I only just got sober again in 2021. And I only just now, at the age of 55, feel like I am finally completely connected in my soul and my mind and my feelings. And so, even looking back to the 90s, my book is about that period, and the character is very much, Lamb is very much a stand-in for me. Completely different in a lot of ways, but in that respect of being an outsider and of being, of never really connecting, that was me. So while I was going to the space, to Townsend, I was not present on an emotional level, on a psychic level. I was, still, even though I was making that journey through, coming out and trying to find a connection in the gay community or whatever, it just never quite hit. And so it was, for me, going to that space, going out to that club, other clubs, was always sort of like a search that never produced results, always looking for something. And so, at the club, looking for a connection, looking for a boyfriend, looking for a good time. It was a frustrating thing, going for me.
Why do you think that you kept going?
I didn't know what else to do. It's kind of like, what good is sitting all alone in your room,
So with that in mind then, what words of advice do you think that version of Troy needed to hear?
I don't like to give advice to people. And, the only thing that I could think of is, just like meeting my younger self. I don't know that I would know what to say to make it better, but I might just loop my arm in his and say, hey, let's get out of here and let's go talk, because you definitely need somebody to talk to. And I would be happy to be that person for you, because that's what I didn't have, I think,
And that's us for yet another week. Now, before I let you go, if you enjoyed this chat and you want to find out more about Troy, first of all, who could blame you? Second of all, he's really easy to find on the internet. His website is troyfordauthor.com or on Instagram at Mr. Troy Ford Author. And on top of that, he runs not one, but 2 newsletters. One, which is called Ford Knows, shares his trials and tribulations and gives a sneak peek into his writing process. And the other, Q Stack, is a directory of queer creators who are using the platform Substack. So I'll make sure that the details are in the show notes for this episode so you don't miss anything. I won't bore you by reading out the www and W. Oh, also, as I said at the top of the episode, Troy is just about to release his new book, Lamb, and I encourage you, let's just stick with encourage. I encourage you to go out and grab yourself a copy when it comes out, or pre-order it now, because pre-ordering makes a huge difference, especially for indie authors. Right. Oh, okay. Yes. And finally, please come and find me on social media. I'm on Instagram and TikTok at Lost Spaces Pod. Right. My name is Kay Anderson. You've been listening to Lost Spaces, and I hope you have a great week. Thanks for hanging out with me.